Zaria sat on the cold metallic table, her long silver-blue hair flowing over her shoulders. The dim lights of the research lab reflected off her smooth violet-tinted skin, giving her an almost ethereal glow. She wasn't human. She was an alien, one of the last of her kind. Across from her, Dr. Alex Carter adjusted his glasses, carefully analyzing the holographic screen floating before him. He was a scientist, one of the best in xenobiology, and had been studying Zaria for months. Her body was unlike anything he had ever seen. Adaptive, mysterious, and constantly changing. "This should be safe," Alex muttered as he tapped on his digital console. His voice was steady, but deep down, he wasn't sure. Zaria tilted her head, her glowing amber eyes filled with curiosity. "What are you doing, Alex?" she asked. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but there was a trace of nervousness in it. "Just a small scan," Alex reassured her. "We're trying to understand how your cells react to human technology." She nodded, trusting him. After all, he had been the only human to ever treat her with kindness. Alex activated the biosignal enhancer, a harmless device meant to track cellular activity. It sent a gentle pulse through Zaria's body, mapping her biology in real time. Everything seemed normal. Until it wasn't. A sharp buzzing sound filled the air. The holographic display flickered violently, numbers and graphs spiraling out of control. Alex's heart skipped a beat. "That's not supposed to happen." Zaria gasped, her hands clutching her chest. A strange warmth spread through her body, like liquid fire coursing through her veins. Her skin shimmered, her muscles tensed. Something inside her was changing. "Hey, Alex." Her voice trembled. "Something is." Before she could finish, a wave of intense energy pulsed from her body. The lab shook, the lights dimmed for a second. Alex took a step back, his eyes wide with shock. He had seen alien transformations before, but never like this. Zaria clutched the edge of the table, breathing heavily. Her body felt strange, heavier, unfamiliar. She looked down at herself and froze. "What? What is this?" she whispered, staring at her own body in disbelief. Her curves had expanded, dramatically. Her body, once lean and graceful, had transformed in ways she never imagined. Her alien biology had somehow amplified, reacting wildly to the human tech. She could feel the change. Her balance was off, her movements slower, her clothes suddenly too tight. Her face burned with embarrassment. Alex gulped. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. This wasn't supposed to happen. Zaria's hands trembled as she touched her altered form. I don't understand," she stammered. "Why is my body changing?" Alex scrambled to check the data, his fingers flying across the console. Numbers scrolled across the screen in rapid succession. The results made his stomach twist. This is insane," he whispered. Zaria looked at him with panic in her eyes. "Alex, tell me what's happening." Alex turned to her, his expression a mix of shock and realization. "Your cells, they're not just reacting. They're adapting." She stared at him, confused. Adapting to what? He hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "To us. To humans." Silence filled the room. Zaria's breath caught in her throat. She had always known she was different. But this was something else. Something unnatural. Her alien instinct screamed at her. This was not supposed to happen. Her kind didn't change like this. They didn't just evolve overnight. Alex rubbed his temple, trying to make sense of it. "I think the biosignal enhancer triggered something inside you. Something your species has never encountered before." Zaria clenched her fists, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion, frustration, and fear. "You mean this might be permanent?" Alex hesitated before answering. I don't know." The uncertainty in his voice sent a chill down her spine. She slid off the table, her movements awkward. She felt different, heavier. Every step was strange, foreign. I need to fix this, she muttered, mostly to herself. Alex's mind raced. Could this change be reversed? Was it even safe to try? Before he could say anything, a red warning light flashed across the lab. A loud alarm blared, shaking the room. Biological DTECTE. Security OCK activated. Zaria's eyes widened. What's happening now? Alex turned to the screen. His face turned pale. The lab thinks you're a threat. Zaria's breath hitched. What do we do? The doors slammed shut. The security system had marked her as an unknown biological risk. Alex looked at her, urgency in his voice. We run. Zaria swallowed hard. Her body still felt strange, unstable, but there was no time to process it now. Because if they didn't escape, she might never get out of here alive. Alex's heart pounded as the lab's security sirens blared around them. The red warning lights flashed across the metallic walls, casting an eerie glow on Zaria's trembling figure. She looked at him, her glowing amber eyes filled with confusion and fear. What do we do now? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the tension in it was sharp. Alex's mind raced. He knew the lab's security system was designed to neutralize biological threats with extreme measures. If they didn't act fast, Zaria would be trapped here, or worse. We need to move. Now. His voice was urgent, his body already shifting into action. He grabbed his tablet, fingers flying across the screen, trying to override the lockdown. Come on, he muttered. Zaria took a step toward him, but something felt wrong. Her balance was completely off. The weight of her newly transformed body made movement feel alien to her. She clenched her fists, frustration building inside her. I can't. I don't feel right. Alex barely looked up, still trying to override the system. It's just your body adjusting. Your muscles, your reflexes, everything's in flux. You need to push through it. She took a deep breath. Push through it. Right. The doors suddenly hissed, locking down tighter. A metallic voice rang through the lab. Unauthorized biological entity detected. Containment protocol engaged. Zaria's blood ran cold. Then, with a deafening clang, the walls around them shifted. Hidden compartments slid open, revealing mechanized security drones. Each one was armed with stun cannons and paralysis darts. Zaria's body tensed. Alex cursed under his breath. This is bad. The drones hovered closer, scanning her with red laser beams. Biological anomaly must be contained. Zaria's instincts kicked in. Even in her unstable state, she knew she couldn't let them touch her. One of the drones fired. She barely managed to dodge as a blue energy pulse sizzled past her ear, hitting the table behind her. The metal instantly froze over, ice spreading across the surface. Zaria's eyes widened. Cryotech. If they hit her with that, she wouldn't just be immobilized. She'd be frozen solid. Alex yanked her arm, pulling her behind a counter. We need to get to the emergency exit. Another shot blasted past them. Sparks flew as a console exploded, showering them in smoke and debris. Zaria coughed, her body still struggling to adjust. I can't fight like this, Alex. He looked at her, desperate. You don't have to fight. You just have to run. Another shot fired. This time, Zaria reacted purely on instinct. Her newly strengthened legs pushed off the ground, sending her soaring into the air. She twisted midair, barely dodging another freezing blast. Her body moved with a force she wasn't used to, almost too powerful. She landed harder than expected, her knees buckling under the weight. Alex grabbed her before she could collapse. You're stronger now. You just don't know how to control it yet. She didn't have time to respond. The drones repositioned, surrounding them. Zaria clenched her jaw. She hated feeling out of control. She hated feeling weak. No, not now. Not when her life was on the line. Something deep inside her shifted. A strange sensation coursed through her veins, a pulse of raw energy. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. She felt different. Then her body moved on its own. Before Alex could blink, Zaria's entire form shimmered. A faint glow surrounded her skin, pulsing with an unearthly light. And then she vanished. The drones scanned frantically, their sensors flickering. Alex's jaw dropped. What the? Zaria reappeared behind one of the drones, as if she had teleported. Her instincts screamed at her to act. And this time, she listened. Her hands clamped onto the drone's frame. A rush of power surged through her muscles. With barely any effort, she ripped the drone apart, its metal frame crumpling like paper in her hands. The remaining drones whirred in alarm, adjusting their aim. Zaria's heart raced. She didn't understand what just happened, but she knew one thing for sure. Her body was no longer the same. And whatever she had just unlocked, it was only the beginning. Alex could barely process what he had just seen. 1 second, Zaria was struggling to even stand, her body unbalanced from the sudden transformation. The next, she had vanished and reappeared, tearing through a heavily armored drone like it was nothing more than paper. This wasn't just an adjustment. This was something new, something impossible. Zaria stared at her own hands, her breathing shallow. The remnants of the drone's crushed metal shell lay at her feet, sparking uselessly. The power that had just coursed through her veins, it was unlike anything she had ever felt before. Her fingers twitched, her muscles ached, not from exhaustion, but from something else. Overload. She swallowed hard. Alex, something's wrong with me. Alex took a cautious step closer, scanning her glowing form. It's not wrong, Zaria. It's just. Before he could finish, the overhead speakers crackled to life. Security breach detected. Reinforcements en route. Lethal countermeasures authorized. Alex's stomach dropped. Lethal. They weren't playing games anymore. The walls shifted again, but this time, the changes were far more ominous. Panels slid back to reveal turrets, their barrels already humming with energy. Thick, reinforced blast doors slammed shut over the main exit. Zaria's breathing quickened. She didn't need an explanation. She could feel what was coming next. Alex, her voice trembled. I don't think I can control this. He clenched his jaw. Then we need to get out before you have to. But the instant he spoke, the turrets locked onto Zaria. Their scanners flickered with red light. Target identified. The hum of charging plasma filled the air. Alex lunged for cover, grabbing Zaria's arm. Move. The turrets opened fire. Blazing energy rounds tore through the air, leaving streaks of superheated plasma in their wake. The lab exploded with destruction, consoles and metal plating melting under the intense heat. Zaria tried to run, but her legs felt strange. Her body was too light, too fast. Before she even realized it, she had moved, instantly. One moment, she was standing beside Alex. The next, she was across the room, her back slamming against the reinforced exit. Her eyes went wide. She gasped for air. What did I just? Alex was still crouched behind cover, staring at her. You just teleported, he breathed. Zaria shook her head. No, that's impossible. But she had felt it, the way reality had snapped around her, the way her body had ignored the space between where she stood and where she appeared. The power inside her, it wasn't just strength. It was rewriting the rules of physics. Before she could process it, another round of plasma fire erupted. This time, the shots were faster, more precise. The turrets had adapted. Alex yanked a metal console down, using it as a temporary shield. We can't stay here. That exit, can you break through it? Zaria turned to face the blast doors behind her. They were reinforced titanium alloy, nearly impervious to conventional weapons. But was she still conventional? She took a breath. Then, with every ounce of focus, she threw a punch. Her fist collided with the metal. and the entire door caved inward with an explosive, thunderous impact. The metal folded like paper, the reinforced structure bending outward as if it had been struck by an unstoppable force. Zaria staggered back, staring at the damage. She had done that. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced. Alex didn't waste a second. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her through the opening. They emerged into a long, dark corridor. The emergency lights flickered ominously. In the distance, alarms still blared. But there was something new. Something worse. Heavy, metallic footsteps. Zaria's enhanced senses picked up the sound instantly. Alex's face darkened. "They're sending the juggernauts." Zaria's pulse pounded. What's a juggernaut? Alex didn't look at her as he started running. Something that makes those drones look like toys. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Zaria clenched her fists. The power inside her stirred again. Whatever was coming, she knew she would have to face it. The corridor stretched ahead like an endless void, the flickering emergency lights casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. Every second felt like a countdown, each footstep behind them a ticking bomb growing closer. Alex moved fast, his mind racing through possible escape routes, but Zaria's steps were slower, heavier. Not because she was tired. She didn't feel tired at all. But because she could sense something. Something was watching them. Her enhanced vision flickered. The world around her felt sharper, more detailed. The metallic scent of the lab mixed with something new, a scent she had never noticed before. Synthetic. Cold. Then she heard it. Not footsteps. Something else. A low mechanical growl. She froze. Alex noticed too. He stopped just a few feet ahead, turning slowly. His face was tense, his fingers tightening around the pistol he had grabbed from the lab. "They're here." Zaria swallowed hard. "Who's they?" A metallic thud echoed behind them. Then another. The air grew heavier. Then, stepping out from the shadows, it appeared. 7 feet tall, armor-plated with black nanite mesh, shifting and pulsing like a living thing. Glowing red optics locked onto them with an eerie stillness. Its arms were too long, its hands too sharp, and as it moved forward, the ground shook beneath its weight. Zaria felt it before she even saw it. A juggernaut. Alex's voice was tight. "Stay behind me." Zaria's fingers twitched. The energy inside her coiled like a predator ready to strike. But the juggernaut didn't attack. Not yet. It just watched. Then, from the shadows, another step forward. Then another. 3 juggernauts. Zaria's breath hitched. Impossible. Alex tensed. They don't usually come in groups. The lead juggernaut took another slow step forward, tilting its head slightly, almost as if analyzing her. Then, in a deep, distorted voice, it spoke. "Subject Z13 confirmed. Priority acquisition authorized." Zaria's blood ran cold. Alex cursed under his breath. "They're not here to kill you." Zaria took a step back. "Then what do they want?" The juggernaut's optics pulsed. Containment. Then, in an instant, it moved. Faster than anything that size should have been able to. Its massive hand lashed out, aiming straight for Zaria. But something reacted inside her before she could even think. Her vision warped. The world bent. And suddenly, she wasn't there anymore. The air snapped around her. The space she had occupied a fraction of a second ago was now just a void, the juggernaut's fist slamming into the floor with the force of a meteor. The metal plating buckled and cracked, sending shockwaves through the entire corridor. Zaria reappeared at the far end of the hall, her breath ragged. Teleportation. Again. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had moved instantly. She had felt the fabric of reality bend around her. And now, she felt stronger. The energy inside her wasn't fading. It was growing. The juggernauts recalibrated. The lead one turned sharply toward her, its optics burning brighter. Enhanced response detected. Adjusting protocol. Then, its entire body shifted. The black nanite mesh covering its armor expanded, pulsing, changing. Its limbs grew more flexible, its movements more fluid. The sheer weight of its presence made Zaria's stomach churn. This wasn't just a machine. It was learning, evolving. Alex fired. 3 clean shots. The plasma round struck the juggernaut's head, but the energy dissipated instantly. The nanite mesh absorbed it, the impact leaving nothing but faint, glowing embers. "Great," Alex muttered. "That's new." The second juggernaut lunged. This time, it wasn't going for Zaria. It was going for Alex. Zaria's body moved on instinct. 1 second she was watching in horror. The next, she was there. Right between them. Her hand shot out and caught the juggernaut's fist. The entire corridor shook. The sheer force behind the strike should have sent her flying. But instead, the juggernaut stopped. Its fist trembled in her grasp. Cracks formed along its nanite plating, energy rippling through its arm. Zaria's own glowing eyes widened. She wasn't just fast. She wasn't just teleporting. She was stronger than them. The juggernaut staggered back. Its optics flickered, as if reassessing the situation. For the first time, the machines hesitated. Zaria could feel her pulse pounding, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from something else. Something dangerous. She clenched her fist, and the entire corridor trembled. The silence after the battle was deafening. A shattered corridor still hummed with the energy of the fight, walls scorched with the remnants of plasma rounds, the ground dented from the force of the blows. Sparks flickered from broken conduits, casting eerie shadows over the 3 fallen juggernauts. Zaria stood in the center of it all, her chest rising and falling in deep, measured breaths. She could still feel the power coursing through her veins, alive, raw, untamed. Her fingers flexed, the sensation of the juggernaut's massive, metal fists still lingering in her palm. She had stopped it. No, she had crushed it. Her glowing gaze flickered over the battlefield, scanning the wreckage, the broken bodies of the machines. The same machines that had once terrified her, that had been unstoppable, relentless. Now they lay in ruin. Alex let out a long breath, lowering his gun. His hands were shaking, not from the fight, but from what he had just witnessed. He hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. "You're not just different, Zaria. You're something else entirely." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. The power still burned inside her, but now the deeper fear crept in. Not fear of them. Fear of herself. "What's happening to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex didn't answer immediately. He holstered his weapon, glancing around. "We need to move. Fast. If those things were sent to capture you, then there's more where they came from." She knew he was right, but something inside her resisted the idea of running. For the first time, she didn't feel like prey. For the first time, she felt like she could fight back. Still, she nodded. The logical part of her knew staying here was a mistake. Whatever had sent the juggernauts wouldn't stop. And now they knew she was more than they expected. Alex motioned toward a passage on the left, one of the service tunnels leading deeper into the underground facility. "There's a way out through here. It'll take us under the main complex and—" He stopped. Zaria followed his gaze and froze. The wreckage of one of the juggernauts twitched. A low, metallic hum filled the air. Then, movement. The shattered nanite mesh of the fallen machine shifted. Its broken pieces began to reform, crawling back together, reconstructing itself like some monstrous insect shedding its skin. Zaria took a step back, her heart hammering. Alex cursed under his breath. Oh, hell no. The juggernaut's optics flared back to life, but something was different. Its body had changed. The nanites had rearranged, adapting to the damage. The cracks she had left in its armor were gone. No, worse than gone. They had been reinforced. Zaria's fists clenched. The reality hit her like a cold wave. They weren't just fighting machines. They were fighting something that could learn. The juggernaut straightened, its movements smoother, more fluid than before. Then, in a deep, distorted tone, it spoke again. Subject Z13. Designation: High threat. A second later, 2 more red lights flickered in the distance. The fallen juggernauts were getting back up. Zaria's blood ran cold. Alex grabbed her arm. "We have to go. Now." She hesitated, but only for a second. Then they ran. The tunnels were tight, narrow corridors lined with old, rusting pipes and forgotten machinery. The air was damp, filled with the scent of oil and dust. Zaria's enhanced vision let her see through the darkness. But the deeper they went, the more she felt it. A presence. Something was down here. Something waiting. Alex moved ahead, leading them through a series of twists and turns, his breathing sharp and controlled. But Zaria could hear more footsteps. Not just theirs. The juggernauts were following. Faster than before. They weren't just adapting. They were hunting. Alex muttered under his breath. "This tunnel should lead to an old elevator shaft. If we can reach the surface, we might have a shot at losing them." Zaria didn't respond. Her mind was racing. She could fight them. She knew she could. But for how long? If they kept adapting, if they kept evolving, would there be a point where she couldn't win? Would there be a point where she was outmatched? Before she could dwell on the thought, the corridors split into 2 paths. Left, right. Alex hesitated for a fraction of a second, then picked left. They dashed down the narrow passage, the sound of their own breathing loud in the confined space. The air shifted, colder, heavier. Then, the wall exploded. Zaria barely had time to react before a massive, clawed hand burst through the metal plating, grabbing Alex. He let out a strangled yell as he was ripped away from her. Zaria skidded to a stop, eyes wide in horror. A new juggernaut. Bigger. Stronger. Its body wasn't like the others. The nanite mesh flowed like liquid metal, reshaping its limbs into whatever it needed. And right now, it had formed a crushing grip around Alex's torso. Zaria's entire body ignited with power. The air around her shimmered, crackling with raw energy. She launched forward, faster than before, faster than she had ever moved. The tunnel blurred. Her vision narrowed to one single goal. Get him back. The juggernaut turned its glowing red optics toward her and smiled. Then, with one brutal motion, it disappeared into the shadows, dragging Alex with it. Zaria skidded to a halt, her heart slamming against her ribs. Gone. He was gone. The tunnel stretched before her, dark and endless. The sound of mechanical footsteps faded into the distance, swallowed by the depths of the underground facility. Her fingers curled into fists. Her breath was ragged. She had never felt helpless before. And she wasn't about to start now. Slowly, she straightened. Her glowing gaze cut through the darkness. They had taken him. They had made their biggest mistake. Because now, she was done running. The cold air of the underground facility hummed with an eerie silence. Zaria stood in the wreckage of the tunnel, her fists still trembling, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The dim emergency lights above flickered, barely illuminating the metal walls scared by battle. Alex was gone. Taken. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the monstrous juggernaut's liquid metal grip crushing around his torso, the gleam of its red optics as it smiled before vanishing into the shadows with him. Zaria had never felt fear like this before. Not for herself. For him. Her hands clenched, the remnants of energy still crackling across her skin. She had barely begun to understand her strength, her transformation. And now, she would have to push herself further than ever before. The juggernauts weren't just hunting her. They were studying her, testing her. And she refused to be their experiment. Her glowing eyes narrowed as she turned to face the dark corridor ahead. There was no more time for hesitation. She had one goal now. Find Alex and destroy anything that stood in her way. The corridors twisted and turned in a labyrinth of steel, each passage identical to the last. The deeper Zaria went, the more she felt it. The hum beneath her feet, a subtle vibration in the walls. The facility was alive. Not in the way a machine functioned, but in the way something watched. Something waited. Every few meters, she found traces of movement, drag marks on the floor. Alex had been pulled this way. The metal walls bore the marks of struggle, scratches from his boots, dents from his resistance. He had fought back. Good. But was he still alive? A low, rhythmic beeping sound reached her ears. Zaria pressed herself against the cold steel wall and peered around the next corner. A small patrol drone hovered just ahead, its sleek, insect-like body scanning the area. It was alone. Zaria moved. With inhuman speed, she dashed forward, gripping the drone in both hands before it could react. A quick twist. Crack. The metal frame buckled in her grasp, the lights in its core flickering before going dark. She crouched, scanning the broken device. A tiny data chip was embedded inside its casing. Zaria tore it free and pressed it to her wrist. A flicker of light appeared across her vision, an interface overlaying her senses. Accessing facility logs, the screen flickered. Maps, heat signatures, prisoner transport routes. Her pulse quickened. Alex was being held in Lab Sector X9, deep underground. And he wasn't alone. There were others. Zaria moved like a ghost through the corridors, her body low, her senses heightened. The facility had shifted. What was once an abandoned underground structure had come alive with activity. She heard them before she saw them. Voices, mechanical and organic. Zaria crouched behind a rusted storage crate, peering through the gaps. A group of juggernauts stood in formation ahead, their forms gleaming under the facility's dim lights. Unlike the ones she had fought before, these were different, more evolved. Their armor was no longer rigid. It pulsed. The nanites moved like liquid metal, adjusting their structure with every subtle movement. And in the center of them, Alex. He was restrained, his arms locked behind his back with an energy clamp. His face was bruised, his breathing slow, but he was alive. Zaria exhaled sharply. That was all that mattered. A voice, smooth and calculated, echoed through the corridor. Subject X-13 remains resilient. Curious. Zaria's gaze snapped toward the source. A figure stood beyond the juggernauts, tall, poised, and utterly unnatural. A humanoid, but not like any human she had ever seen. Their skin was metallic, shifting between shades of silver and deep blue, as if their entire body was composed of nanites. Their eyes were hollow black voids, yet somehow brimming with intelligence. The architect. She knew the name. The one who had created the juggernauts. The one who had sent them after her. And now, they had Alex. The architect stepped forward, tilting their head slightly as they studied him. Your resilience is fascinating, they mused. But you are irrelevant. Your role is complete. They raised a single finger, and a pulse of energy surged through Alex's restraints. His body convulsed, his teeth clenched in pain. Zaria's rage ignited. She had seen enough. The air around her vibrated, her body glowing with an unseen force. The floor beneath her cracked, the very atmosphere bending under the pressure of her power. She stepped forward. The nearest juggernaut turned. Too late. Zaria launched herself into action. Her fist connected with the first juggernaut's chest, and the impact sent a shockwave through the corridor. The machine exploded backward, slamming into the wall with a sickening crunch. The second juggernaut lunged, its liquid metal form shifting into blades. Zaria twisted, grabbing its arm mid-strike, and with a single motion, ripped it clean off. The architect barely had time to react before she was in front of them. Their black eyes flickered. Ah, that was the only response they managed before Zaria's hand closed around their throat. The entire facility shuddered. Let him go. The architect's lips curved into a smile. You have no idea what you truly are, do you? Zaria's grip tightened. A surge of energy built within her palm, the very nanites composing the architect's body beginning to unravel under her touch. The juggernauts hesitated. The unstoppable machines were afraid. And that was when Zaria knew. She was no longer just a test subject, no longer just a survivor. She was something else entirely. The architect's smile faded. For the first time, they looked afraid. Impossible. Zaria's glowing gaze burned into them. She leaned in, her voice low, deadly. Try me. Then, she unleashed hell. The facility collapsed around them. Zaria's power surged like a living storm, her energy tearing through the walls, shattering steel and circuitry alike. The architect writhed in her grasp, their nanite bodies struggling to maintain form. Their once fluid metallic skin began to fracture, tiny particles breaking away and dissolving into nothingness. You don't understand, the architect gasped, their hollow black eyes flickering erratically. You are unstable. Zaria's grip tightened, her fingers pressing into the architect's dissolving throat. I understand enough. Her power pulsed again, and the architect let out a strangled cry as their body contorted, struggling against an invisible force far beyond their control. The nanites, the very foundation of their being, were rejecting them. Zaria wasn't just strong. She was something else, something they never predicted. The remaining juggernauts hesitated, their red optics flickering with uncertainty. They had never been programmed for this. To them, Zaria should not exist. And yet here she was. She took a slow step forward, her energy crackling around her in waves. Let him go, she said, her voice dangerously calm. The architect's mouth twisted into something resembling a smile. Cold, knowing, accepting. You think this is a victory, they whispered. Zaria felt a shift in the air, a deep hum beneath her feet. The ground trembled. And then, everything exploded. The blast threw her backward, her body slamming into a collapsing wall as fire and metal rained from above. The architect's form disintegrated before her eyes, their nanites dissolving into the atmosphere. The juggernauts, their systems overwhelmed, collapsed, their bodies twitching before falling lifeless to the ground. But Zaria had no time to celebrate. Her vision blurred, her body aching from the sheer force of the explosion. She pushed herself up, coughing through the thick smoke that filled the air. And then she saw him. Alex, still strapped to the energy restraints, still unmoving. Her heart lurched. Ignoring the pain screaming through her limbs, Zaria ran. The corridor ahead was already collapsing, steel beams falling like dead weight as the facility's power core failed. Sparks rained from exposed wires, the ground beneath them splitting apart. Zaria reached Alex's side, her fingers fumbling against the energy clamps. Come on, she muttered. The restraints held firm. She growled, pressing her palm against the locking mechanism. Her energy flared, and with a burst of heat, the clamps shattered. Alex's body slumped forward. Zaria caught him before he could fall, her arms wrapping around his battered frame. Alex, she shook him gently. Wake up. A slow, painful inhale. Then his eyes fluttered open. Zaria. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. You actually came for me. She exhaled sharply, relief flooding through her. Of course, I did, idiot. He managed a weak chuckle before grimacing. I think I broke a rib. Or 3. Noted, she said. Now let's get the hell out of here before this place buries us alive. She pulled him up, wrapping his arm around her shoulder for support. He winced but didn't protest. Together, they stumbled forward, navigating through the crumbling remains of the facility. The exit was close. But something felt wrong. A pressure in the air. A pulse of energy, unlike anything she had felt before. Zaria turned, her glowing eyes scanning the ruined hallways. And then, from the shadows, Something moved. It wasn't the juggernauts. It wasn't the architect. It was something else entirely. Something older. Something waiting. Zaria froze, her entire body tensing. "Zaria," Alex whispered, "we need to move." "I know," she murmured. But she didn't take another step. Because in that moment, deep within the destruction and the fire, a pair of eyes opened. Not human. Not machine. Something in between. And it was watching them.